You might have scrolled through countless videos on YouTube telling you that you're learning French the wrong way, that you have to do it this way, use these methods to learn fast. You get so overwhelmed with all this content about optimizing language learning, but you don't even know where to start with the basics. If that sounds like you, and you're sick and tired of feeling like you're one secret method away from being able to learn French, then this video is for you. In this video, I'm going to simplify French learning as much as I can for you so that you can stop feeling paralyzed and start doing some actual learning. I'll be giving you the core progression that every French learner should follow. So, phonetics, grammar, listening, speaking, and then writing, as well as very practical tips and resources I have for each step. I teach French, and this is stuff that I actually use with my own students, so if you appreciate me putting all of this knowledge out there for free, then feel free to subscribe or buy me a coffee. Also, if you're interested in learning spoken French with me the fun way, sign up for a free trial session with the link below. One thing that many people don't prioritize enough when they first start learning a language is getting a deep understanding of the phonetics. Not just to be able to understand the spoken language, but also to form the foundations of a good accent, because otherwise, it's very likely that you'll accumulate some bad habits that'll be much harder to break later down the line. For example, I have quite a few intermediate level students that are actually quite comfortable with speaking in French, but I can see how ingrained some of their bad habits are already. For example, not being able to pronounce the nasal vowels correctly or not being able to pronounce the French you. And these sounds exist in so many different words. And so what happens is that we have to go and fix their pronunciation word for word through repetition. And this is just an extremely inefficient process compared to just starting out with good habits. Even if you don't care about having a good accent or sounding like a native speaker, many French words sound so similar that they're only separated by slight nuances in pronunciation. Even if you mispronounce just one vowel, that can completely change the meaning of a sentence. So it's still in your best interest to know how to pronounce things well, even if all you want is just to be understood. Also, keep in mind that if you're ever planning on moving to France, French people will take you a lot less seriously if you have a bad accent. Personally, I used Google Translate a lot when I first started learning French. Like the first week, I'd spend hours every day going word by word, mimicking the exact pronunciation that I heard, recognizing patterns and the most common exceptions, and it didn't take me that long before I was able to pronounce pretty much almost every French word I saw correctly. Once you're comfortable with pronunciation, it's time to learn grammar and vocab to know how to form sentences. And for this, you have two options: either get a textbook or get a personal tutor. Forget apps like Duolingo. I guarantee that you won't get any meaningful progress from doing them. And unless you really like being around other learners, I'd also say forget group classes. They slow down your progress a lot. It's really important that you do either one of those first two things that I mentioned, because they give you a structure to follow. And not just any structure, but the right structure. It already takes so much energy learning a language that you can't afford to waste more energy on administrative tasks, like deciding how you want to go about learning a language, or how to structure your study sessions. So you need to delegate that to either a textbook or a tutor. You might also be thinking, aren't textbooks a little bit old-fashioned? And yeah, they might be, but unlike most other flashier methods, they work. Most textbooks will get you where you need to go. But out of all of them, I recommend Practice Makes Perfect, Complete French Grammar by Annie Hemingway. I also recommend getting physical textbooks, because number one, it's so much easier to remember stuff when you're writing them down, and number two, I find that when you're working with pen and paper, it allows you to focus better and for a longer period of time too. If you really can't or don't want to get a textbook for whatever reason, two really great alternatives that I use for my own students are the channels Learn French with Alexa and Perfect French with Dylan. After scouring the internet, these are hands down the best resources for learning French grammar in video format. The videos are short, sweet, and simple, and despite the creators being French themselves, everything is explained in very clear English. As for tutors, something very important that every beginner and lower intermediate level learner should know is that you're probably better off with a non-native speaking teacher. Again, as a French tutor for English speakers myself, I've had a lot of students tell me how much better I am at identifying what they struggle with and explaining grammar compared to the native speaking teachers they've had. And it makes sense because I had to learn every single tiny aspect of spoken French as an adult. Like, I had to consciously absorb every concept and integrate them into the way I speak, whereas a native French speaker wouldn't have that experience. Because of this, native speaking teachers tend to impose a really rigid curriculum on you, especially if you're a beginner, Or it's the other way around where they go too easy on you and they don't correct you as much as you would like. And they also tend to struggle with giving feedback or explanations that are precise enough. Not to say that this is what all native speaking teachers are like. This is just what I've heard a lot about from my own students. I do feel like native speaking teachers provide a ton of value, but definitely more for refining your French when you're already at an upper intermediate level like a B2, rather than for building foundational knowledge and fluency. Once you learn the conditionnel présent, or even just the future simple, since they're both very similar, most input becomes comprehensible, and it's at this point where I feel like you can really scale up the time that you spend listening to French. Actually, listening should be your main priority at this point, and progression with grammar can kinda start taking a backseat, because listening volume is the only way that you can overcome the most difficult part of French, which is being able to understand spoken French. One really fun way to start this process is with LingoPie, which is a streaming platform that's built specifically for language learning. Everything about the interface is designed to make it as easy as possible for you to learn while watching. So the series I'm watching here is called Fail. It follows this poor guy going through a bunch of disastrous speed dating experiences.
T'es pas du genre bavard, toi, hein?
Excuse-moi, je suis pas très à l'aise à l'oral.
You have dual language subtitles, and what's cool is that they're interactive, like you can hover over different parts of a sentence to see what they each mean, and you can click into them to break it down word by word. There's also this learning panel on the side where you can basically scroll through the entire script line by line. You can also ask AI to explain any sentence you find confusing, and review the phrases that you've clicked on. These phrases actually get saved automatically to a list so that you can quiz yourself on them or turn them into flashcards, which I find really practical. Even when you're not watching something, there are so many more features to help you practice. I don't have the time to go over all of them, but overall, this is just a really solid tool for language learning. So if you want to try LingoPie out for yourself with a 7-day free trial, click the link in the description or in the pinned comment below. And if you get a yearly plan, you'll get a 50% discount, which is huge. Thank you to LingoPie for sponsoring this video, and let's get right back into it. Something non-negotiable that all French learners have to do is to maximize conversational input through places like YouTube. If you're a complete beginner, I recommend Coffee Break French Season 1. There's like 40 episodes, and it's so easy that you can learn so much from it, even just from passive listening alone. Once you know enough of the basics of spoken French, the best thing that you can do is to watch as many videos as you can of conversations between native speakers, with subtitles of course. It could be any topic, as long as you're speaking authentically and at a natural pace. You can see some examples of these videos on screen. If you're looking for specific topics, Easy French is probably the best channel for this, and since their content is mostly focused on doing street interviews, you'll definitely learn a lot about how to express an opinion if you watch them enough. Just avoid spending too much time on listening to the news or watching documentaries or shows that are dubbed in French, because that kind of French is very proper and is not necessarily how most people speak in everyday life. I feel like when learning any language in general, listening is the one thing that you need to do if you can't afford to do anything else, since it helps you improve in every other area of your target language. French is especially hard when it comes to this because of the gap between the written and spoken forms of the language, but listening is something that you have to stick to consistently, even if you feel like you're not making any progress, and this phase can last for months. In my experience, the progress isn't linear, but if you stick it out long enough, there will come a point where everything clicks, and then it becomes exponential from there. So keep your focus on the light at the end of the tunnel. Moving on to speaking. Now you might be wondering why I put speaking near the end of the progression, and the answer is because the quality of your speaking also depends on the vocab and the intuition that you absorb through listening. Obviously, you don't have to listen for a certain number of hours before you start practicing speaking. This is just a logical progression for learning any language. And even if you practice speaking way more than you do listening, you'll be fine. The way I see it, there are 3 main ways you can practice speaking in French. First of which is, again, a tutor. Having a tutor actively identify your mistakes and guide you on how to form sentences in a way that's more natural is by far the most efficient approach. If you're willing to pay for it, it's always worth the time that it'll save you. The second way that you can practice speaking is through language exchange. And this would typically involve apps like HelloTalk or Tandem, where you can find people that are willing to teach you French in exchange for you helping them with English, for example. It will be a bit difficult to find serious language partners that you also vibe with and who are also available enough for you to practice with consistently. But if you do manage to find one, then it's actually a very great way to practice speaking without having to pay anything. The third option is to join French meetups. Not everyone has this option, but if you live in a mid-sized city in the US, for example, there's a good chance you can find one near you. These meetups are usually made up of French learners at varying levels, just like yourself, and the goal is simply to meet people and have conversations in French. In bigger cities, there's also a chance that native French speakers will join too. It can feel a bit awkward since not everyone may be able to speak French fluently, but in my experience, there are always at least 2 to 4 people that are able to speak close to a native level, and I recommend learning from these people as much as you can. Now, I put writing last because that's where you'll probably have to spend the least amount of time on. Written French and spoken French are 2 very different things, but unless you're putting yourself through very specific things like a written French exam or French literature, you can more than get by with everything else in life with spoken French alone. Unless you're obsessed with the language, you don't really need to put yourself through the rigor of learning how to write French that skillfully. I used to work for French companies, and even the level of written French required in the corporate world isn't that big of a jump from regular spoken French. And if you ever need to write anything super fancy, you'd probably just use ChatGPT anyway. I'd also say that writing is probably the easiest part of the language, since French is quite similar to English in its written form. So in any case, it won't be too difficult to progress if you ever feel like you need to get better at it. Alright, I hope that gave you all the clarity you needed in your French learning journey. Not so subtle plug. If you're interested in learning spoken French or English with me the fun way, sign up for a free trial session with the link below. As always, let me know what you think in the comments below. I always love reading what you guys have to say. And until next time, have a great rest of your day. Bye guys, love you.